The early morning mist hung low over the Sandringham estate as Catherine pulled back the heavy curtains in the Norfolk house. The December air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke from the chimneys that dotted the sprawling property. She had been awake for nearly an hour, unable to sleep through the nervous energy that had been building for weeks. Today was Christmas Day, and, for the first time since her cancer diagnosis and treatment earlier in the year, she would be joining the traditional royal walk to St. Mary Magdalene Church. Her reflection in the window showed a woman who had been through more than most could imagine. The months of chemotherapy had changed her, not just physically but emotionally. Her hair, once flowing and lustrous, was now shorter and styled differently to accommodate the regrowth. But her eyes held a depth that hadn't been there before, a quiet strength born from facing mortality and emerging with a renewed appreciation for every moment. William stirred in the bed behind her, his voice thick with sleep. "You're up early, darling." He sat up, immediately alert as he noticed her silhouette against the window. These past months had taught him to read her moods, to recognize when she needed space and when she needed his presence. The ordeal had brought them closer in ways they hadn't expected, stripping away any pretense and leaving only the raw, honest love that had sustained them through their darkest hours. "I couldn't sleep," Catherine admitted, turning to face him. "I keep thinking about today, about walking with everyone watching. What if I'm not ready? What if the children notice how tired I get?" Her voice carried the vulnerability she rarely allowed others to see, the fear that despite her recovery, she might still be letting her family down. William rose from the bed and crossed to her, his arms encircling her waist as he pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "You've been through the hardest thing any of us could imagine, and you've come through it with such grace. The children are so proud of you, and so am I. We'll take it at your pace, and if you need to step back at any point, we will." Down the hallway, Prince George was already awake, quietly reading in his room. At 11, he had understood more about his mother's illness than his parents had initially realized. He had heard the hushed conversations, seen the worry lines that appeared on his father's face during those frightening early months. The young prince had taken on an air of responsibility that seemed beyond his years, often checking on his younger siblings and helping them understand why their mother sometimes needed to rest more than usual. Charlotte, now 9, had her mother's intuitive nature and had sensed the shift in the household dynamics immediately. She had become Catherine's shadow during the recovery period, often bringing her small gifts, drawings, flowers from the garden, or simply curling up beside her mother during the difficult days. This morning, she was carefully arranging the dress she had chosen for church, wanting everything to be perfect for their mother's return to public appearances. Louis, the youngest at 6, had adapted with the resilience that only children possess. While he didn't fully comprehend the gravity of what his family had endured, he had noticed that hugs lasted longer and bedtime stories were never rushed anymore. He bounded into his parents' room now, his energy infectious as he climbed onto the bed. "Is it time for church yet? Will there be lots of people?" His questions tumbled out in rapid succession, and Catherine felt her heart lift at his enthusiasm. This was why she had pushed herself to participate today, for these moments of normalcy that her children deserved. The breakfast table in the morning room was set with the informal china, a tradition that Catherine had always appreciated about Sandringham. Despite the grandeur of the estate, family meals maintained an intimacy that felt genuine. King Charles had already taken his morning walk around the grounds, and Queen Camilla was reviewing the day's schedule with one of the private secretaries. The loss of Queen Elizabeth continued to cast a shadow over these gatherings, but there was also a sense of the family adapting to their new roles and responsibilities. As the family gathered for breakfast, Catherine noticed how everyone seemed to be watching her with a mixture of concern and admiration. The past year had changed all of them in different ways. William had stepped up his royal duties to cover for her absence, but, more importantly, he had discovered a depth of emotional strength he hadn't known he possessed. The children had learned about resilience and the importance of family support in ways that no textbook could teach. "The weather looks favorable for the walk," Charles mentioned, glancing out at the brightening sky. "The crowds will be manageable today, and the church service should be quite moving. Bishop Michael has prepared something special." He paused, his eyes meeting Catherine's across the table. "But, please, my dear, don't feel any pressure to participate in every aspect if you're not feeling up to it." Catherine smiled, appreciating his concern while also recognizing his understanding of her determination to reclaim her role. "I want to be there. This year has taught me how precious these traditions are, how important it is to show up for the moments that matter. I may not be exactly the same as I was before, but I'm here, and I'm grateful. The morning progressed with the familiar rhythm of preparation for a royal engagement. Catherine's personal assistant helped her into the carefully chosen outfit, a coat that was elegant but not too formal, in a color that would photograph well but also reflected her subdued mood. Her stylist worked on her hair, creating a look that was polished but natural, acknowledging the changes while presenting her at her best. In the nursery, the children were being dressed by their nanny, though they were increasingly capable of managing their own preparation. George, in particular, had become quite particular about his appearance, understanding that today would be photographed and scrutinized. Charlotte was excited about her new dress, while Louis required patient negotiation about wearing his formal shoes. The private family moment before leaving the house was one that Catherine treasured. They stood together in the entrance hall, the children fidgeting slightly with nervous energy while William performed a final check of their appearances. Charles and Camilla joined them, creating a picture of multi-generational unity that would soon be shared with the world. Remember, William said quietly to the children, today is about being together as a family and celebrating Christmas. The cameras and people are just part of what we do, but what matters is that we're supporting each other. His words were as much for Catherine as for the children, a gentle reminder that they were united in this public display of private resilience. Catherine took a deep breath, feeling the familiar tightness in her chest that accompanied public appearances. But this time, it was different. This time, she wasn't just performing a royal duty, she was reclaiming her life, step by step. The woman who walked out of Sandringham House that morning was forever changed by her experience with cancer, but she was also more authentically herself than she had ever been. The short drive to the church area where they would begin their walk gave Catherine a few final moments of privacy. She looked out at the estate grounds, remembering all the Christmas mornings she had walked this path with the family, how routine it had once seemed. Now, every tradition felt weighted with meaning, every moment a gift to be consciously experienced rather than simply endured. As their car approached the starting point for the walk, Catherine could see the crowds beginning to gather. The familiar sight of well-wishers, photographers, and royal watchers created a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. She knew that her appearance would be analyzed, that every gesture would be interpreted as a sign of her recovery or continued fragility. But she also knew that many in that crowd were people who had followed her journey, who had sent letters and flowers during her treatment, who genuinely cared about her well-being. William reached over and squeezed her hand. "Ready?" he asked, his voice carrying all the love and support of their shared journey. Catherine nodded, straightening her shoulders and preparing to step back into her public role. "Ready," she replied, and meant it. Whatever challenges the day might bring, she was facing them as herself, not just as a princess or a patient, but as a woman who had looked death in the face and chosen to embrace life more fully than ever before. The car door opened, and the sounds of the crowd filled the air. Catherine stepped out into the December morning, feeling the cold air on her face and the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. But, instead of the overwhelming anxiety she had feared, she felt a surprising sense of peace. She was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by the family that had sustained her through the darkest period of her life, ready to continue writing their story together. The walk to church stretched ahead of them, a symbolic journey from the private struggles of the past year toward a future filled with hope and renewed purpose. As the family began to move forward together, Catherine felt each step as a small victory, each moment of connection with the crowd as evidence of her healing, not just physically but emotionally and spiritually as well. This Christmas morning at Sandringham was more than just another royal tradition, it was a testament to the power of love, family, and the human capacity to find joy even after the deepest sorrow. As they walked toward St. Mary Magdalene Church, Catherine knew that this day would mark not just her return to public life, but her emergence as a woman transformed by her experience, ready to use her platform and her story to help others find their own strength in the face of adversity. The gravel path crunched beneath their feet as the royal family emerged from their private entrance onto the public walkway. Catherine felt the familiar flutter of nerves as cameras clicked and flashed in rapid succession, but this time the sound seemed less intrusive, more like a chorus welcoming her back to life. The crowd had grown substantially since their arrival, with people lined up 3 and 4 deep along the barriers that had been erected to create a clear pathway to the church. Charlotte instinctively moved closer to her mother, her small hand finding Catherine's gloved one. The 9-year-old had become acutely aware of public scrutiny over the past year, having overheard conversations about the media's intense interest in her mother's health and recovery. This protective gesture, so natural and unguarded, immediately caught the attention of photographers, but Catherine was grateful for the anchor of her daughter's presence. "Look, Mama," Louis whispered, tugging on Catherine's other hand. "Someone brought their dog wearing reindeer antlers." His delight was infectious, and Catherine found herself genuinely smiling for the first time that morning as she spotted the golden retriever sporting festive headwear among the crowd. The moment reminded her of why these public appearances mattered. They weren't just about duty or tradition, but about sharing genuine human moments with people who had taken the royal family into their hearts. William walked slightly behind and to the side, his protective instincts heightened after months of watching Catherine battle her illness with characteristic grace and determination. He had learned to read the subtle signs of her energy levels, the slight tightening around her eyes when fatigue was setting in, the way she held her shoulders when she was pushing through discomfort for the sake of appearances. This morning, he was relieved to see her walking with genuine strength, her posture confident and her interactions with the crowd appearing natural rather than forced. Prince George, now showing the self-consciousness that came with approaching adolescence, maintained a dignified composure that would have made his great-grandmother proud. He had grown several inches over the past year, and his newfound height seemed to come with an increased awareness of his role and responsibilities. The young prince had been profoundly affected by witnessing his mother's vulnerability, and it had accelerated his understanding of both his privileged position and the very real human challenges that even royalty couldn't escape. As they progressed along the path, Catherine began to notice individual faces in the crowd. There was Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman from the village who had attended every Christmas service for the past 20 years, always wearing the same purple hat with its cluster of artificial berries. Behind her stood a young couple with twin toddlers bundled in matching red coats, the children wide-eyed at the spectacle unfolding before them. These were the people who made these public appearances meaningful, ordinary families for whom the royal family represented continuity and tradition in an increasingly uncertain world. King Charles walked with Queen Camilla slightly ahead of the Wales family, setting a measured pace that accommodated Catherine's need to take the walk slowly. His relationship with his daughter-in-law had deepened considerably during her treatment, as they had discovered a shared understanding of facing serious health challenges in the public eye. His own cancer diagnosis earlier in the year had created an unexpected bond between them, a mutual recognition of the peculiar burden of maintaining public composure while privately grappling with mortality. "Your Majesty! Princess Catherine!" The calls from the crowd were warm and encouraging, but Catherine noticed they were also tinged with a gentle concern that hadn't been present in previous years. People seemed to be consciously offering support rather than simply seeking attention, and several held handmade signs with messages like "Welcome back" and "Strength and Love." These gestures moved her more than she had expected, representing as they did the very best of human nature, the instinct to rally around someone who had faced adversity. Halfway to the church, Catherine paused briefly to accept a small bouquet from a little girl who couldn't have been more than 4 years old. The child's mother had clearly coached her for the moment, but when Catherine knelt down to her level, the little girl forgot her prepared words and simply stared in wonder. "Are you a real princess?" she whispered, and Catherine's response, "I'm a real person, just like you," was captured by nearby microphones and would later be quoted as evidence of her changed perspective on her role and identity. The interaction reminded Catherine of her own children at that age, of their innocent questions about her royal duties and their gradual understanding of what it meant to be born into such an unusual family. Louis had been about that same age when he had asked if being a princess meant she never got scared or sad, and she had struggled with how to explain that titles and tiaras offered no protection against life's deepest challenges. William watched his wife's interaction with the child and felt a surge of admiration that surprised him with its intensity. The woman kneeling on the gravel path, ignoring the expensive fabric of her coat and the dozens of cameras capturing her every expression, was simultaneously the person he had fallen in love with at university and someone entirely transformed by her recent experience. Her illness had stripped away any remaining artifice, leaving behind an authenticity that made her more compelling than ever. As they resumed walking, Charlotte began pointing out details in the crowd to her mother: a man wearing a Union Jack waistcoat, a woman with a corgi on a leash, a group of teenagers taking selfies. Her running commentary provided a welcome distraction from the intensity of the public scrutiny, and Catherine found herself seeing the scene through her daughter's eyes, appreciating the carnival-like atmosphere rather than feeling overwhelmed by it. The ancient church of St. Mary Magdalene came into view, its Norman tower rising against the pale December sky. Catherine had attended services there many times over the years, but this morning it seemed to represent something beyond mere tradition. The building had stood for nearly 1,000 years, witnessing countless Christmas celebrations, housing prayers of gratitude and pleas for strength from generation after generation. Today, Catherine would add her own thanksgiving to that long history, grateful not just for her recovery but for the clarity that had emerged from her struggle. The final approach to the church required navigating through the densest part of the crowd, and Catherine felt the familiar tightness in her chest return. But, instead of the panic she had sometimes experienced during her treatment, this felt more like anticipation. She was genuinely curious about who would be inside the church, what the service would include, and how it would feel to participate in this beloved tradition after a year that had fundamentally changed her relationship with faith, family, and the future. Louis had been remarkably patient for a 6-year-old, but, as they neared the church entrance, his excitement began to bubble over. He started pointing enthusiastically at the bell tower, asking if they could climb up to see the bells, wondering if the church mice lived there like in the story his nanny had read to him. His questions and observations provided a soundtrack of childish wonder that reminded everyone present that Christmas was, above all, a celebration of hope and new beginnings. George, meanwhile, had been quietly observing the crowd's reactions to his family, developing the analytical skills that would serve him well in his future role. He had noticed how people's faces lit up when they saw his mother, how the energy of the crowd seemed to lift when she smiled or waved. These lessons in the power of presence and the responsibility that came with public attention were being absorbed in real time, shaping his understanding of what it meant to serve. As they reached the church steps, Catherine turned for one final acknowledgement of the crowd that had gathered to witness this moment. The sight that greeted her was overwhelming in its warmth. Hundreds of faces, all turned toward her family with expressions of genuine affection and support. Many people were openly emotional, and Catherine realized that her journey had become, in some small way, part of their stories too. Her struggle and recovery had offered them an example of resilience, a reminder that even those who seemed to have everything could face profound challenges and emerge stronger. William offered his arm as they climbed the stone steps, a gesture that was both practical support and symbolic solidarity. Together, they crossed the threshold into the ancient church where their family would gather for a service of celebration and reflection, carrying with them the love and good wishes of everyone who had witnessed their walk from the privacy of Sandringham House to this public affirmation of faith, family, and the enduring power of hope. The heavy wooden doors closed behind them, muffling the sounds of the crowd and creating a moment of sacred silence before the service would begin. Catherine took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar scent of old stone and candle wax, feeling the peace that always seemed to descend when she entered this particular sanctuary. Whatever happened in the service ahead, she had already accomplished something significant simply by being there, by choosing to show up and participate fully in this tradition that connected her not just to her royal duties but to the larger human experience of seeking meaning, comfort, and community in times of both celebration and struggle. The interior of St. Mary Magdalene Church enveloped the royal family in its centuries-old embrace of weathered stone and filtered light. Catherine paused just inside the doorway, allowing her eyes to adjust while breathing in the familiar mixture of ancient wood, candle wax, and winter flowers that decorated the altar. The church was smaller and more intimate than many of the grand cathedrals where she had attended state services, and this morning that intimacy felt like a blessing rather than a constraint. The congregation was already seated, a carefully curated mixture of local residents, estate staff, and extended family members who had gathered for this most personal of royal Christmas traditions. Catherine recognized many faces from previous years, the estate manager and his wife, the head gardener who had tended the Sandringham grounds for 3 decades, elderly villagers who had attended this service since childhood. Their presence created an atmosphere of genuine community rather than formal ceremony. As the family made their way to their designated pew in the front section of the church, Catherine became acutely aware of the whispered conversations that followed in their wake. But, unlike the sometimes intrusive speculation she had grown accustomed to during public appearances, these seemed to carry undertones of genuine warmth and concern. She caught fragments, "looking so well, what strength, beautiful family," that suggested the congregation's focus was on celebration rather than scrutiny. Charlotte immediately claimed the seat next to her mother, while Louis settled between his parents with the resigned acceptance of a child who understood that church required a certain level of proper behavior. George took his place with the adult dignity that had become his trademark, though Catherine noticed he still had a small toy soldier clutched in his pocket, a reminder that he was still very much a child despite his increasingly mature demeanor. The service began with a processional hymn that filled the small space with voices raised in harmony. Catherine had always found church music particularly moving, but this morning every note seemed to resonate with deeper meaning. The familiar words of "O come, all ye faithful" carried new weight as she reflected on what it meant to be faithful through periods of darkness and uncertainty, what it took to come with joy and triumph after experiencing the depths of fear and vulnerability. Bishop Michael, who had known the royal family for many years, had clearly chosen his readings and homily with Catherine's journey in mind. Without being explicitly personal or intrusive, his words focused on themes of healing, renewal, and the ways that difficult experiences could deepen rather than diminish faith. Catherine found herself hanging on every word, surprised by how hungry she had become for this kind of spiritual nourishment after months of focusing solely on physical recovery. During the first reading from Isaiah, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles, they will run and not grow weary, they will walk and not be faint." Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes. The words seemed written specifically for her experience, capturing both the exhaustion she had felt during the darkest days of her treatment and the gradual return of energy and purpose that had characterized her recovery. William, seated beside her, noticed her emotional response and discreetly offered his handkerchief. This small gesture of care, invisible to most of the congregation but deeply meaningful to Catherine, reminded her of the countless ways he had supported her through the past year. His strength had become the foundation that allowed her own healing to take place, and she felt a rush of gratitude for the partner who had proven himself capable of carrying both of them when necessary. The children's choir, comprised of local youngsters ranging in age from 7 to 14, performed a special arrangement of Silent Night that had been prepared specifically for this service. Catherine watched Charlotte's face light up as she listened, knowing her daughter harbored secret dreams of joining such a choir herself. The innocence and purity of the young voices created a moment of transcendent beauty that seemed to lift the entire congregation beyond the walls of the small church. Louis, despite his best efforts to remain still and quiet, began to fidget during the longer readings. Catherine gently placed her hand on his leg, a maternal gesture so natural and unconscious that it perfectly captured the balance she had learned to strike between her public role and her identity as a mother. Even in the most formal settings, her children's needs took precedence, and this authenticity had become one of her most endearing qualities to the British public. During the sermon, Bishop Michael spoke about the gifts that sometimes emerge from our greatest challenges: increased empathy, deeper relationships, a clearer understanding of what truly matters in life. His words seemed to speak directly to Catherine's experience without exploiting it, offering a framework for understanding her illness not as a tragedy to be overcome but as a transformative experience that had the potential to enrich both her own life and her service to others. The congregation included several individuals who had their own stories of health struggles and recovery, and Catherine found herself making eye contact with a woman in the third row who had undergone breast cancer treatment the previous year. The silent acknowledgement that passed between them spoke to the invisible community of survivors, the understanding that transcended words and connected people through shared experience rather than shared circumstances. When the time came for the collection, Prince George carefully placed his own contribution in the plate, money he had earned through small chores around Anmer Hall and had insisted on giving himself. This gesture of personal generosity, taught by his parents but chosen by him, represented the values that William and Catherine had worked to instill despite the extraordinary circumstances of their children's upbringing. The highlight of the service came during the singing of the first Noel, when the entire congregation joined together in a way that erased all distinctions between royalty and commoners, between locals and visitors, between young and old. Catherine's voice blended with hundreds of others in an expression of shared faith and celebration that reminded her why these traditions mattered, why showing up and participating in community rituals created bonds that transcended individual circumstances. As the service drew toward its conclusion, Catherine realized that her fears about this public appearance had been largely unfounded. Rather than feeling exposed or vulnerable, she felt supported and embraced by a community that had followed her journey and genuinely celebrated her recovery. The church had provided a sanctuary not just from the outside world but from her own anxieties about whether she was ready to resume her public role. The final hymn, "Joy to the World," seemed to burst forth with particular enthusiasm, as if the congregation wanted to ensure that their celebration reached beyond the stone walls to touch everyone who had been unable to attend. Catherine sang with full voice for the first time in months, feeling the vibrations in her chest and throat as physical evidence of her renewed vitality and strength. During the closing prayer, Bishop Michael offered a special blessing for all those facing health challenges, for families supporting loved ones through difficult times, and for the renewal of hope that Christmas represented. The words seemed to encompass not just Catherine's specific experience but the universal human struggle with mortality and the search for meaning in the face of uncertainty. As the service concluded and the family prepared to exit the church, Catherine felt a profound sense of completion. She had not just attended a Christmas service, she had participated in a ritual of renewal and recommitment that marked her emergence from the most challenging period of her life. The woman who would walk back through the church doors was not the same person who had entered, and this transformation was evident to everyone who witnessed her radiant smile and the confident way she carried herself. The congregation began to file out slowly, many lingering to exchange Christmas greetings and to catch a glimpse of the royal family. Catherine found herself genuinely enjoying these brief interactions, no longer feeling the need to maintain a perfect facade but instead engaging with authentic warmth and interest. Her illness had stripped away much of her self-consciousness, leaving behind a more natural and accessible version of herself that people found both relatable and inspiring. William gathered their family together near the church door, preparing for the walk back to Sandringham House that would complete this public portion of their Christmas celebration. As they stood together in the ancient doorway, framed by stone carved by medieval craftsmen, they created a picture of modern royalty that honored tradition while embracing change, that acknowledged struggle while celebrating triumph. The heavy wooden doors opened onto the December afternoon, revealing the crowd that had waited patiently for their emergence. But Catherine no longer saw this as an ordeal to be endured. Instead, it represented an opportunity to share her gratitude and joy with people who had supported her through prayer, good wishes, and genuine concern. Her transformation was now complete, ready to be shared with a world that was eager to witness the next chapter of her remarkable story. The afternoon light had softened to a golden glow by the time the royal family emerged from St. Mary Magdalene Church, casting long shadows across the gravel path that led back to Sandringham House. Catherine stepped into this warm illumination feeling fundamentally transformed by the service, as if the prayers and hymns had washed away the last residues of fear and uncertainty that had clung to her throughout her recovery. The crowd that awaited them had grown during the service, with many people having arrived specifically to witness the family's departure from the church. But the atmosphere felt different now, less intense and more celebratory, as if everyone present understood that they were witnessing not just a royal tradition but a genuine moment of triumph over adversity. The energy was infectious, and even Louis seemed to sense the specialness of the occasion, walking with unusual dignity while still maintaining his characteristic enthusiasm. As they began their walk back to the house, Catherine found herself stopping more frequently to chat with well-wishers, accepting flowers and small gifts with genuine pleasure rather than dutiful obligation. An elderly gentleman in a military blazer caught her attention, and, when she paused to speak with him, he quietly mentioned that his late wife had undergone similar treatment years earlier. The brief conversation that followed, conducted in hushed tones away from the cameras, represented the kind of meaningful human connection that made these public appearances worthwhile. Charlotte had been observing her mother's interactions with growing fascination, beginning to understand that their family's public role involved more than just showing up and looking presentable. She watched as Catherine listened intently to people's stories, offered comfort where appropriate, and shared in their joy during what was, for most of the crowd, one of the highlights of their Christmas celebration. The 9-year-old was witnessing masterclass in genuine engagement, learning lessons about service and compassion that no textbook could provide. William walked a few steps behind, maintaining the protective stance that had become second nature during Catherine's illness but also giving her space to navigate these interactions at her own pace. He had watched her confidence rebuild gradually over the past few months, but seeing her engage so naturally with the public today confirmed that she had not just recovered her physical health but had also rediscovered her sense of purpose and identity as a working member of the royal family. Prince George, increasingly aware of his future responsibilities, was taking mental notes about how his mother handled various situations, how she remembered to ask follow-up questions about people's families, how she managed to make each brief conversation feel personal and meaningful, how she balanced accessibility with appropriate dignity. These observations would prove invaluable as he began to take on more public engagements in the coming years. The photographer's presence, which had felt overwhelming at the start of the day, now seemed almost incidental to Catherine. She was no longer performing for the cameras but simply living authentically in the moment, and this shift in perspective made all the difference in how natural and relaxed she appeared in the resulting images. The photographs from this Christmas walk would later be recognized as capturing a pivotal moment in her evolution as a public figure. King Charles, walking slightly ahead with Queen Camilla, occasionally glanced back to monitor Catherine's energy levels and the family's overall well-being. His own experience with serious illness had given him insight into the delicate balance between public duty and personal recovery, and he was proud of how Catherine had navigated this challenging re-entry into royal responsibilities. The bond between them, strengthened through shared adversity, had become one of the unexpected positive developments of a difficult year. As they approached the halfway point in their walk, Louis spotted a young boy in the crowd who appeared to be about his own age, and he tugged on his mother's coat to point him out. The child was wearing a military-style coat similar to Louis's own, and this tiny connection sparked a brief but delightful interaction that demonstrated how even the youngest member of the royal family was learning to find joy in connecting with the public. The moment was captured by photographers and would later become one of the most widely shared images from the day. The conversation that developed around this encounter revealed something beautiful about community and shared celebration. The boy's parents explained that they had driven 3 hours from Manchester specifically to attend the Christmas service, that this had become an annual tradition for their family, and that seeing the royal family had always been one of the highlights of their Christmas celebration. Catherine found herself genuinely moved by this dedication, by the reminder that their presence meant something significant to people beyond the immediate Norfolk community. Throughout the walk, Catherine noticed details that she might have missed in previous years when her focus was primarily on getting through the public appearance efficiently. She observed an elderly woman in a wheelchair who had positioned herself at a particularly good vantage point, a group of teenagers who were alternately taking selfies and watching the proceedings with genuine interest, and a family with small children who had clearly planned their Christmas morning around attending this event. These observations deepened her understanding of her role and its impact on others. Her illness had given her a new perspective on the privilege and responsibility of public life, and she was beginning to see how her own journey through adversity might serve as encouragement for others facing similar challenges. The realization that her struggle and recovery had meaning beyond her personal experience added a dimension of purpose to her public appearances that hadn't existed before. William noticed the change in his wife's demeanor and energy, recognizing the confident, engaged woman he had fallen in love with but also seeing the wisdom and depth that her recent experiences had added to her character. The combination was powerful and attractive in ways that went far beyond physical appearance, representing the emergence of someone who had faced their deepest fears and discovered reserves of strength they hadn't known they possessed. As the family neared Sandringham House, the crowd began to thin slightly, but those who remained seemed reluctant to end this magical encounter. Catherine found herself making eye contact with a young mother holding a baby who couldn't have been more than a few months old, and something about the woman's expression suggested that she too might be navigating health challenges while caring for her family. The wordless understanding that passed between them spoke to the universal experiences of motherhood and resilience that transcended all boundaries of class and circumstance. The final portion of the walk took them through the formal gates of the Sandringham estate, where a smaller group of staff and local officials waited to offer Christmas greetings. This more intimate setting allowed for longer conversations and deeper connections, and Catherine found herself energized rather than depleted by the social interaction. Her stamina, both physical and emotional, had clearly returned to levels that would allow her to resume a full schedule of royal duties. As they approached the main entrance to Sandringham House, Catherine turned one final time to wave to the crowd that had accompanied them on this symbolic journey from public ceremony back to private family celebration. The gesture was spontaneous and heartfelt, a genuine expression of gratitude for the support and love that had surrounded her family throughout the day. The heavy front door of Sandringham House closed behind them, creating an immediate shift from public to private space, from formal engagement to family intimacy. Catherine leaned against the door for a moment, closing her eyes and allowing herself to fully absorb what she had just accomplished. She had not merely attended a Christmas service, she had reclaimed her public role, demonstrated her recovery to those who cared about her well-being, and discovered that her experience with illness had enhanced rather than diminished her ability to connect with others. The children immediately began chattering about the day's events, comparing notes about interesting people they had met and funny moments they had observed. Their excitement and pride in their mother's performance was evident, and Catherine realized that they too had been somewhat nervous about her return to public duties. Seeing her succeed had been as important for them as it had been for her, proof that their family had not just survived their recent challenges but had emerged stronger and more united. William drew her into a quiet embrace, holding her close while the children continued their animated discussion with their grandparents. No words were necessary between them. The successful completion of this important milestone spoke for itself. They had navigated one of their greatest challenges as a couple and as a family, and today represented not an ending but a new beginning, the start of the next chapter in their lives together. As the family gathered for their private Christmas lunch, Catherine felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. Gratitude for her health, for her family's love and support, for the skilled medical professionals who had guided her treatment, and for the thousands of people who had sent prayers and good wishes throughout her journey. But, perhaps most importantly, she felt grateful for the clarity that her illness had brought to her understanding of what truly mattered in life. The Christmas celebration that followed would be different from previous years, marked by a deeper appreciation for time together and a greater awareness of life's fragility and beauty. But it would also be filled with joy, laughter, and hope for the future, embodying the very best of what the Christmas season represented: the promise of renewal, the power of love, and the enduring strength of family bonds that could withstand any challenge life might bring.